Hey everyone, this is Casey with C. Reeves Makes, and welcome to week 3 of the Big Build Off, hosted by the Builders Challenge. Last week you got to follow along as I showed you how I started designing the base and templates using the grain of the walnut for inspiration. After making and testing my templates, I then got everything to rough shape using the bandsaw and the table saw. This week I'm going to pick right up where we left off. I want to make sure that all of my pieces are the exact same thickness, so I start running them through my drum sander, which is set up with an 80 grit belt. I am not taking off much, just evening out all the parts to be just around 1 3/4 inches thick. I'm going to start by laying out the centers of each of my upper and lower stretcher pieces. Using my stretcher templates, I mark the curves that will be cut later at the bandsaw. This will give me a reference as to where to find the half lap marks that will be on each board. I will be using the dado stack to cut the half laps in each of the pieces. Using a sharp blade, I score the backs of the stretchers to prevent the dado blade from blowing out the grain. Then it was time to install my new dado blade. I have never used one before and I was excited to get cutting. I clamped a piece of plywood as an end stop to my table saw fence. I was really impressed with how easy it was to cut these dados. Walnut is a pleasant wood to work with and all of the cuts were super smooth with zero burning. I took an 1/8 inch cut with each of the passes and just kept working back and forth between the fence stop on my Rockler miter gauge and the end stop on my table saw. Once everything was set up, the process was easy. Not a bad fit for my first real dado cut and half lap joint. And then it was over to the bandsaw to cut just proud of my layout lines. One final test fit after the cuts. I then repeated the entire process for the upper stretchers. I'm really happy with how easy these templates made this whole process. I'll definitely be doing this again in the future. The next day was final shaping day. Using double-sided tape, I carefully attached each of the templates to the pieces, making sure that all of my lines matched up. I then got out my router table and chose a Rockler flush door trimming bit. This bit is 2 inches long and allows me to cut the 1 3/4 stock thickness. I removed a majority of the material from the piece and then made a final finishing pass along the template edge to ensure a nice clean line. And I did this for every piece. After all the routing was done, I got out the giant sled and it was back to the table saw to make the final miter and end cuts on each of the 4 legs. I really like using this sled method, as I can put the parts in the holders knowing that they're in their locations. I make a rough cut to take off a majority of the material and then I come back and I push the part over just slightly to make one final pass. I had to rotate the sled to do each of the leg's ends. I'll be using dominoes for the joinery on the base. I carefully lined up each of the legs to the stretchers and measured and marked out each of the dominoes' locations. For the glue up, I made sure everything was in place and ready. I had each of my pieces marked so I knew what went where. After getting everything together and aligned, I used 2 of Bessie's EHKL trigger clamps along with a K-body parallel clamp to lock it all down. If you remember, I left excess material on the legs for clamping areas. After the glue dried, I came back and cleaned up the surfaces of any squeeze out using my sander. I needed to cut off the clamping areas on the legs and then clean up those lines at the router table. Then it was back to more sanding and then the final glue up. The last leg of the base had to be left off so that I could put all of the half laps together. So the glue up process was half laps first, clamp them, and then add the last leg and clamp it securely. Two years ago at Workbench Con, I went to Bessie's booth and noticed that they had these parallel clamp adapters. These are the KRAS jaw adapters for the K-body Revos. You take off the pads on the Revo clamps and slide these in place. They allow for misaligned glue ups, and they have these rubber soft face pads on them that allow them to kind of stick to the wood as you're clamping them in place. They are a great addition if you're doing any kind of misaligned glue ups like this. I'm really happy with how this base is coming along. Some of the grain pattern lineups are simply amazing. I am super excited to put some finish on this base and get the whole table put together. I'd like to thank Bessie for sponsoring today's video and being a part of the Builders Challenge and the Big Build Off. Well, that wraps up week 3. We're halfway there in the video series. Tune in next week where I start putting some of the final details on the base and getting everything ready for finish. I'm Casey with C. Reeves Makes, and thanks for watching.